Hello, welcome back to the channel. It's called Nobby on Cars, but you probably already know that. And this is the Volkswagen ID3, and if you followed the channel, you probably know I've already had this car on the video. But this review is kind of different because I've taken an ID3 for a long-term review, about a month, and I want to try and live with an EV for longer than the usual week or so I get with a typical press car. And the reason I've done this is the government want 1 million of these vehicles on the road by 2030. And you know, that really sounds lovely. But we're now, a quarter of the way through 2021. So we've less than 9 years to get a lot more of these cars on the road. So people are going to need to start being less scared and intimidated of EVs. Now this just happens to be a massively important car for VW. They're hedging their bets on the success of this in the same way as they did with the Beetle and the Golf. Now, with both those cars, they probably didn't really know exactly how successful they would be. And maybe they're not quite sure with this as well. But they have to at least try. You can buy this car in Ireland from €33,000. Now, that's the price after grants. So that's another thing for your head to try and get itself around. If you're new to the whole EV situation in Ireland, yes, you get a couple of grants. And that brings the base price of this car to just over 33 grand. You can charge this car, depending on who your service provider is, for somewhere between 10 and 13 euro for a full tank. Now, what will that tank get you? I'll explain in the video. And if you turn on the wipers, does that drop by 100 kilometers? Because these are actual questions people who are curious about EVs, still driving petrol or diesels, have asked me. We'll do a bit of driving, but the first part of this series is more about explaining the different aspects and some tips and tricks for current ID3 owners that maybe you didn't know about. So, get subscribing to the channel if you're curious about EVs. If you think this might be somewhere you want to go with your next car, you're in the right place. Let's just do some practicality here for a minute. The boot in your ID3 is actually a little bit bigger than a Golf. And that's kind of it. It's a boot. You get a bit more space sometimes and a bit less space sometimes in an EV, depending on whether there's room for charging cables or not. Some cars give you a pocket that you can store the stuff under the boot. That's the case in the ID3. Other car companies don't. Can you fit some suitcases in the back of an electric vehicle if you're going on holidays? Well, yes. Okay, Nobby, that's great. I can use my boot. Thanks for letting me know. But talk to me about cables. Right, well, first of all, this is what looks to me like an actual unused 3-pin plug charger, right? This is called a granny cable. It's slow. It will do the same type of output as a bulb in your house. You plug in a lamp, you plug in your car. There is no difference. But the thing with these is, it just takes an awful long time. So you're going to get just over 3 kilowatts out of one of these. That is a 58 kilowatt hour battery. It's going to take you forever. So there's another cable called a Type 2 cable. Now that's at home in my house because I have a charger at home. And that's my challenge for this week. It's not so much of a challenge. I've used the cable in my house to charge this car. And I've used it once. That's it. Once. One stop. It didn't affect me because I plugged it in and it charged while I was watching Netflix or whatever. I didn't even think about it. These lads are fine for if you're in a friend's house and they haven't got a charger and you're staying over. It will charge. It'll just do it incredibly slow. For context on that, your charger at home will do just over 7 kilowatts. And that's pretty much double that charge. So time to charge is directly halved. Everyone with me so far? Behind the wheel of an ID3 is in some ways different to a normal car, but in many other ways is just pretty much the same. The readouts are a little bit different because you're not getting miles per gallon, for example. You're getting kilowatt hours per hour. And that's kind of easy to get your head around once you get used to it. So for example, in colder weather, an electric vehicle uses a bit more range because it has to make the battery warm enough to operate. There's certain scenarios where to charge this car using really fast charging. By fast charging, you're talking 100 kilowatt charging upwards, and this ID3 can do that. But there's a couple of scenarios that have to be right for the car to achieve that fast charging. We'll get into that later because it might get overly complicated, and let's just do baby steps first. So as this car is sitting here, I've got the radio on, the daytime running lights are on, and it's using 0.4 kilowatt hours per hour. When I got into the car earlier and it was a little bit cold and I was just about to drive and I needed to drive, it was using about 3 to 4 kilowatt hours. And as you can tell then, it drops massively. Turn off your climate control and it drops massively again. So there are different things that operate how much range is being used. However, people have asked me, if you turn on the wipers, does that use a whole lot of range? It does actually ever so slightly move. It's like 0.1 for the time they're on. But it doesn't lose you 300 kilometers in range. In fact, the range as I do that stays exactly the same. If I put on the wipers, you can see it go to 2.8. But if I turn them off, that then drops again. And even more so if I turn off the air conditioning. All of a sudden we're back down to 0.3. And even then, wipers on, rises a bit, drops down. But these are still really small amounts. So do not worry, a wiper will not make your car drop in range. Climate will though. With the climate off, at 77%, I have 255 kilometers in the battery. If I turn the climate on, that now drops to 231. Every time you turn your climate on in this car, for example, you'll drop around 25 kilometers. One of the most significant draws of power in any vehicle, but even more so in an EV, is climate and aircon. If you can turn them off and just use your heated seats or your heated steering wheel, you'll use an awful lot less power. In fact, as I look at the vehicle now, with climate on it's using 2.8 kilowatt hours, and if I turn that off, it drops to 0.4. So you can see it really does add up. During the summertime, when the battery's warmer and temperatures are warmer, that range will increase, and chances are your window down will be enough, so you might need the climate control on. And then the range gets even more. And that's why you hear electric vehicle drivers talking about cold weather and temperatures. They're not being nerds. 2 degrees will have a difference in terms of usage and range versus 9 degrees. Seriously. Here's another benefit of EV ownership. Most electric vehicles have a flat floor in the back, and that means your middle passenger has more room. It's just more comfortable to get around. So there's another bonus point. Most clever EVs will have a thing where if there's no passenger in that seat, it will automatically put that side of the climate into eco mode. You know, dual zone climate control, exactly the same, except these cars know there's no one in there, so let's not waste energy putting hot air over that side of the car. We'll keep the driver warm because there's no one else here. Double tap on this and your heated seats come on. Double tap it again and the level of intensity of heat drops till it's fully off. So they're just some of the tips and tricks and hopefully getting rid of myths that you've heard down the pub or whatever about EVs. We're going to go for a drive in a second, and on the next few episodes we'll feature more of those tricks and ways that you can live with an EV. We'll cover that faster charging and how does that work. It's all well and good for me to say I have a charger at home and it's easy and I can stick it on, charge at home and there's no problems. But for the next week driving the ID3, I'm going to rely solely on the public charging network. How does that work out? Will that be an absolute melt? Will charges be broken down? Will they be blocked by other EVs? Or worse, people who are icing them? Icing means you have a normal petrol, diesel, typical fueled car, and you block the EV space that's clearly green by parking in it. And that drives EV owners absolutely bonkers. Imagine someone blocking your driveway. That's kind of what it's like. There's no other way of charging these cars. So before you park in one of those next time, think of the poor owners of cars like this. Driving an EV isn't any huge mystery either. In this car, for example, there's a little control here. Forward is drive, back's reverse. There's a neutral, and the handbrake of the car is also on there. So there is a button to start it, but you don't have to actually use that. As soon as you tip that to D, you move. One of the obvious differences between an EV and most normal cars is the level of torque that an EV has. Torque is that instant pickup speed, that kind of reason that makes you be able to pull out in front of a gap in traffic. And all EVs benefit from that. They have that straight away, instant grunt that makes them fairly quick off the line. As soon as you floor them, you'll generally get a snap as you're pushed back into your seat because there's so much usable power. And that's what makes them great around cities, because for traffic, it's just easy. You spot a gap, you're gone. You get a gap in a green light where there's no traffic coming towards you, you're gone. So it makes them very, very easy to maneuver around city environments. But in the next episode, we'll cover motorway driving in an ID3 and show you what happens to your range. If it's a warmer day, again, you'll have a little bit more. But still, sustained driving at 100 kilometers an hour, 120 kilometers an hour will use more battery than if you're just tipping around town in predominantly 30 kilometer an hour zones. As I mentioned earlier on in the video, miles per gallon, litres per 100 kilometers, they're a thing of the past in an EV. But you do get a display such as this, which tells me I'm currently doing 29.6 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. And if this car has almost a 60 kilowatt hour battery, that means at this current rate of driving, which is a little bit up an incline, you'd get 200 kilometers out of one single charge. But of course, like any vehicle, whether you're accelerating in third gear versus sixth, different scenarios use less range. So in some scenarios, you have a minus figure going in there, which is putting power back into the battery. That's called regenerative braking, or regen. And there's a couple of ways you can apply more forces of that. The B mode on this will mean every time you take your foot off the accelerator, extra braking is applied to the vehicle. Some vehicles will have enough resistance when you put that in that you'll end up not ever really needing the brake except for emergency scenarios, because you'll get used to how far away you are from an item. You let off the accelerator and the car will slowly come to a stop while also putting extra range back into your battery. So that's regen braking, and that again means what your display says at any given time really doesn't tell the true picture of your range. So there are some of the basics of driving an EV to get our head around. If you've got any comments or questions about this ID3 or driving an EV in general, please leave them below. And if you own one of these cars or any EV and you can help in the comments, it's all about trying to educate people who are just not quite convinced. They're just not sure. They're like, I don't know, I'm curious, but tell me more. If you can help in the comments, please do. And if you've got a question about an EV, please leave one and I'll try and answer it as best I can too. And make sure you hit subscribe and the notification button so that in the next episode, where we'll be covering motorway range, how I'm getting on with the public charging network, you'll find all that out. And hopefully by the end of this mini series, you'll have a better understanding of living with an EV.